And one. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Ticklish Business. I'm Kristen Lopez, joined as always by Emily Edwards. And this episode is very special because we don't really have a set topic, but we do have a set interview, and that is with the lovely and amazing Maria Cooper Janis and her co-author, Bruce Boyer. Thank you both for wanting to sit down and talk with us. We are so appreciative.
Well, thank you for your interest in our collaboration, and on behalf of my father, thank you.
Of course, you two have collaborated on a new book, Gary Cooper, Enduring Style, that's focused all about your dad and his role as, I would say, a style icon. I don't know if he would say that, but I would say that. Emily, would you agree?
I don't think there's any question whatsoever, quite frankly. So let's keep going.
let's keep that going. But before we get to our lovely and amazing guests, I do want to briefly remind everyone, if you haven't checked out our Patreon at patreon.com/ticklishbiz, then you should. We do all sorts of additional bonus pods, including doubled features, looking at remakes based on a true podcast, looking at biopics and true crime, as well as our new series, But Have You Read the Series, looking at classic film literary adaptations. We also give out regular care packages of movies, gifts, let you guess on an episode. It's all at patreon.com/ticklishbiz. And of course, me and Emily are both authors. You can order both of our respective books wherever you get books. And our Redbubble store has some fabulous art and amazing merchandise, all designed by Samantha Richardson and Terrence Hilt, featuring your favorite stars, including our ultra popular Gene Kelly, Judy Garland, Makoko mugs. You can find that at ticklishbiz.redbubble.com. So now we're going to get to this amazing book and Gary Cooper. Maria and Bruce, I want to ask a question I'm sure you've been asked a billion times during talking about this book, but what led you to want to tell this specific side of Gary Cooper's persona and career?
Shall I start, Maria? Or
yes, why don't you start, Bruce? I mean,
okay.
The text. I am so grateful to be able to to partner with
sure.
Bruce.
I can easily talk about that. By the way, Kristen, I am not nearly as lovely and amazing as Maria.
No,
I caught your introduction, and I'm not nearly as lovely and amazing. But anyway, my interest at first was to write about Gary Cooper as a sartorial icon. I had written about several film stars, Fred Astaire and the rebel stars of the 1950s, in terms of their sartorial image. You know what I mean? And I had wanted to do a book about Gary Cooper in that way because he was a great sartorial image to men on the screen from the 1920s up through the 50s. For example, if you were to ask somebody like Ralph Lauren, you know, who his idols would be in terms of style, top of the list would be Gary Cooper, you know. So anyway, Maria and I had a mutual friend who introduced us, and Maria graciously invited me around to talk about this. And then at one point, she said, would you like to look at, you know, some of the family photographs? And I said, "Oh my God, I would love that." And so she brought out a whole bunch of wonderful albums, and I looked through them, and my heart absolutely stopped because the photographs were just wonderful, and I knew that nobody had ever seen these before, and it completely changed my mind about what the book would be. I was just going to write some text, but when I saw the photos, I realized right away that that the book had to revolve around these wonderful photos. So that's how that got started from my point of view. But Maria, maybe you want to talk about your interest.
Well, I had done a book several years before called Gary Cooper Off Camera, A Daughter Remembers, which was much more like a personal diary thing. But again, thanks, God bless my wonderful mother, who was very busy behind her camera since from 1933, the year my parents were married, all the way through. So she kept this wonderful history of not only Gary Cooper and personal family life, but of the times in which we lived. And certainly looking at it strictly from a quote style point of view, you can just see the evolution of how people dressed, their thoughts about what was casual, what was permitted wear, whatever. And when people ask about my father, of course, and the word style comes up quite often, but I also did not want him to be pigeonholed and anything written about him simply at that one-dimensional level of style. What did he wear? What why did he choose that tie, etc., etc.? Because really, in living our life, living the style of our life, it is a question of how we lived, and it was it was lifestyle. It wasn't only what you hung on your back. So I was so excited when I met Bruce, and aside from his extensive knowledge, much greater than mine, about really the fashion industry and the men's fashion industry over the decades, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, I thought, oh my God, this would be wonderful if we could collaborate and come up with a book that covered really the truth, that covered reality as it was. And yes, this is how Gary Cooper lived. This is how he dressed. He didn't have a stylist who dressed him. This was his own taste. Like it or not, there are a few wild ties I question, but that's sort of the genesis of the book. When should we just give your viewers a teaser? Because I think this new edition of the book, I think the cover is so fantastic. Or would you prefer to wait for the end of the
I mean, if you want to drop it now, I mean, whenever. We are following your lead. We're happy with whenever and however.
Well, now that you mention it, no, but the front and the back, I think, is a winner. And tell me if I'm holding this, and I don't even know where the camera is now. There, that's the cover.
It's a pretty swanky cover right there.
I think it's a great cover, and the back is, I think, terrific too, because talk about casual lifestyle.
And these photos were shot by your mother, correct?
The front cover was not.
Okay.
The back one.
But even this back photo, I mean, your mom as a photographer is just, I mean, she's up there with Harrell, I mean, that's an evocative image that,
Mhm.
I mean, I shoot stuff with my iPhone and it looks like an amateur with an iPhone. She looks like a professional who's been doing this her entire life.
Truly, there are some photos in here that are Richard Avedon for Deanna Vreeland, levels of composition and photography that are just absolutely stunning.
There are some, obviously. I mean, there's
Yes.
David Douglas Duncan photograph with Picasso, for instance, and our whole family, and there's the incredible Steichen photograph, which is I think jaw dropping, if I can say that about my father. It's an amazing picture.
I
So
mean,
it's a picture of family snapshots and that level.
I regret that I only have this on iPhone, or rather my Kindle, so I'm not sure if it's going to show up when I hold it up. But there's a photo of your father in Western Wales, just in dungarees, which is an absolutely incredible shot.
Isn't that great? Yes, yeah,
It's
Levi should, Levi should claim that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Maybe I can jump here a minute when you mention that, because that's something, to my mind, that's very, very important. There's no other film star that I can certainly easily think of who wore both formal dress, tailored clothing, suits and tuxedos and so forth, and on the other hand, very casual dress, such as cowboy clothes, with equal finesse. Some Hollywood stars looked great in jeans and cowboy boots and so forth, but they didn't wear formal clothing very well. And then there were ones who wore formal clothing very well, but didn't look good in that kind of casual clothing. For example, one of my great sartorial icons, along with Gary Cooper, would be Fred Astaire. But Fred Astaire, I mean, he made one movie where he wore jeans and cowboy boots and so forth, and it was just kind of ludicrous. I mean, he never should have done that, in my opinion. But Gary Cooper was able to wear almost anything he wanted with equal aplomb, and that's just absolutely rare in films. You know what I mean?
I think probably the closest today might be George Clooney, who could yes, but to my mind, and no disrespect to Mr. Clooney, not nearly with the masculine grace and the kind of natural grace and style that Gary Cooper had. And I actually have a theory about all of that, which I'll lay on the two of you. Is that Gary Cooper grew up in the West at a time when the West was still the West. But then later, I think when he was Maria, 8 years old, he went to England. Yeah, a little bit older, but close enough.
Yeah, something like that. And he went to a proper, what we would call a private school, but what the English call a public school. And he had to wear, the tweed suit and the high collar and all of that. And so, and then he came back and went to college here. But so he had all of that experience of wearing completely different, what do I want to say, genres of clothing. And I think that's why he really understood not only clothing, not only what he was doing in his own private life, but he really understood costume. You know,
Well, yeah, well,
I think, Maria, you had mentioned to me at one time that he would wear his costumes around, you know, to break them in, and so he would feel natural in them.
well, I think he learned. I mean, he didn't learn. He absorbed. I think when he was a youngster, in Helena, Montana, of 1905, 6, 7, he absorbed a lot of what was around him, and it wasn't only the cowboys and the ranch hands, but the American Indians were. I think some of his first childhood friends were really the young Indian children, and I hope, and
Mm.
I know his knowledge of the Indian culture, and that goes into how they dressed and their sense of color and their use of color in their, for them, not
Yes.
costumes, that was what they wore. And my father absorbed that, and he made quite a few of his own clothes, when he was younger. But the Indians kind of taught him. I still have a wonderful a buckskin jacket with fringe and all of that, which he made himself.
Yes, I remember you telling me that he made his own moccasins and all sorts of things like that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, what it's you guys bring up a lot of what is in kind of the intro, Ralph Lauren's intro that he writes, which, talks about how Gary Cooper is one of the few icons that look just as comfortable in regular clothes as he did in formal wear.
Yes.
I'm curious for you, Maria, because so often, we as, perpetual Turner Classic Movies fans who watch a lot of these movies, sometimes, I'm assuming that, the clothes of the 30s, 40s, 50s just have this added elegance, even the day-to-day wear. I'm curious to hear from you. I mean, what kind of dresser was your dad when he was at home? How far afield was that from, some of even the normal day-to-day costumes he would wear in his films?
He wasn't. It was not that far afield. He was not that far afield. He would, for instance, there times when we would go to Mexico, for instance, either for vacation or maybe he was on location, and the wonderful colored fabrics that were available, he would buy bolts of fabrics and he'd bring it home, and then he'd take the fabric to Eddie Schmidt, the wonderful tailor in Beverly Hills, and ask them to make him some wear out shirts in bright turquoise blue, and that kind of incorporating native exuberance of clothing into a very nice fitted tuck it shirt or don't tuck it shirt. He was doing that way before that happened. But he loved being in England and getting the clothes he had made for himself in England. He loved doing that. He adored it. He adored beautiful boots. He adored beautiful leather. I mean, he appreciated the details in fine clothing.
How much of that
fine
do you,
stitching.
I apologize. How much of that do you think is linked to his artist's eye and the fact that he was quite an accomplished illustrator and artist?
I would say a lot of that was innate and natural, natural to him. And he had a very keen sense of awareness. And I think that certainly works in any actor's favor when you are aware of the person you're playing opposite. You're not just talking at them or acting at them. you're aware of who that person really is, which means very, very strong powers of observation. And my father had the ability to observe nature, human nature, wildlife nature. He could sit for hours on a rock studying the animal life around him, and sometimes he would sketch it. He would study how a bird flies, and he would draw pictures of the wing. He used to draw pictures for me of how a bird's wing works, and he could identify each category of feathers and what they did. It was talent, yes, natural artistic talent, and a natural ability to really be aware of everything in his surroundings, the human nature and nature.
Well, I know we were talking off line about this earlier, but I mean, I think a great example is something like The Fountainhead, where he's in these jeans and he's salt to the earth, literally based on a lot of the book, at the beginning, and yet is still able to wear, a three-piece suit, and is still, it's got both halves of that. Is there a movie for you where just the multifaceted nature of your father as a style kind of guru for audiences comes through the best?
Oh, I don't think I can think of one. I mean, that isolates the changing characters. Maybe some of the earlier films made in the late 30s, early 40s. But I can't think of a film.
Mostly I just wanted to talk about The Fountainhead, because I know you said you had stories for that one. So I figured great pivot into talking about The Fountainhead.
Well, it's a very short story, but Ayn Rand wanted very much Warner Brothers to do the picture. She insisted that it be Gary Cooper who played Howard Rourke, and she convinced Jack Warner to give a very lavish dinner party to convince Gary Cooper to take the part. So this was told to me by a very close friends of ours in the business who was at the party, and there was a garden and multiple tables with little votive lights and candles and stuff down in the garden. And then it was kind of a the house, it was kind of Spanish steps. There was almost, you could say, a stage, and then Spanish steps going down into the garden. And Ms. Rand had designed her presentation, which was to appear on the terrace steps, whatever, and with script in hand, and read a couple of scenes. So I gather my father is down in the garden with these friends of ours, and absolutely, as she starts laying it on, he wanted to shrink into the shrubbery. She comes out. She has her script. She is dressed in a white diaphanous Grecian flowing something or other, and she was backlit on purpose. So the audience got, I think, much more of Ayn Rand than they ever bargained for. I don't know how much they concentrated on her dialogue. And I gather my father was mortified. He was just, get me out of here. That kind of
I'll
thing.
do the movie if she steps out of the spotlight.
Anyway, he, for whatever reason, he did the film, and I wish I wish I'd been old enough and had the presence of mind to ask him, why did you do the picture?
That's a question I ask everybody that was in that movie. I mean, I'm assuming part of for everybody else, contracts and you're required. But yeah, I'd love to know personally what made him want to take that on, because that is as I said earlier, a bananas movie that everybody should see because it is so weird. Bruce, I want to extend that question to you. I mean, is there a Gary Cooper movie that you think exhibits, his sartorial abilities the best?
Yeah, well, yes, yeah. I think it's. I agree with Maria that I almost prefer his earlier movies, like Design for Living and Desire, and those movies, because he does dress so well in those movies. I mean, the tailored clothing, came from Hollywood and from London and from Rome. And and he just wears it magnificently. I was thinking of, I think it was Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, where he, kind of starts out as this almost a country bumpkin, and is brought to town and gets outfitted in custom made suits and that kind of thing. And I think that's one movie where you can see a range of things. There's no movie to my mind where he mixes both the cowboy gear with the very sophisticated, elegant, chic international tailored clothing. I mean, they're kind of kept separate in the films. I think the feeling was that there should be a kind of uniformity of image, in the movies. So you're either going to get one or the other. But I mean, if you put
Mr. Deeds, you hit the nail on the head, and it's sort of fun because it shows him,
okay,
fitting through fitting that business.
Yes, but if you put a movie like Desire, which he starred with Marlene Dietrich and so forth, and just looks amazing in his tailored clothes, and then juxtapose that with what in many ways I think is his greatest movie and one of the greatest films ever made, High Noon. You can really see that he just apparently could wear anything with a kind of natural grace. I really don't know how to explain it, except to say that he had a talent for it, and he had these early experiences with different genres of clothing and so forth. But it's just one of those magical things, that some people just have that natural grace and style.
You have it. I had it was a funny story. I was dating for a while, wonderful young man, Jody McCrae, who was one of the sons of Joel McCrae, and
yes,
we'd been out to a movie together, and very, very casually dressed, and Jody was dressed in jeans and his boots from the ranch and all that. And we came home, and my mother and father were giving a formal party, and my mother said, well, come on in and join the party for things. So we walk in the front door. They're having coffee, and my mother walks by, greets us, come on in, and she looks down at Jody, and she said, what are you wearing? And it was his cowboy boots full of whatever. She said, go into Gary's room and take a pair of shoes. Do not come in the house with those shoes on. So Jody goes to my father's room, goes to the closet, comes out. So now the two of us are sitting on the couch when some other guests. My father comes, sits down. Hi, Jody, gives me a hug, sits down, is looking at Jody and talking. And he looks down at Jody. He said, gosh, Josie, those are great looking shoes, Jody. Where did you get them? And Jody sort of blushed. He turned bright red.
That's funny.
It's true.
Bruce brings up a really good point too, because I also think Gary Cooper does not get enough credit for being a really good women's actor in a way. Like I think of him in the same vein as something like Cary Grant, where so often, not to disparage the John Wayne fans out there, but John Wayne movies were always about John Wayne, even though you had maybe a Maureen O'Hara or a Katharine Hepburn. The movie is always about him. And yet, Gary Cooper worked with so many equally dominating women, Marlene Dietrich and Audrey Hepburn, who wasn't dominating, but she was an equal star, and he just excels with all of them, which I think is not a rarity in old Hollywood, but not everybody could do it. Not everybody could pull that off.
Yeah, it's almost like ballroom dancing, where he's there to support her doing all of these wonderful screen maneuvers that she's doing, but also he shows the strength that he has as an actor as well, while being an equal pair. It's absolutely phenomenal.
Well, I think some of that goes into what we were speaking about earlier, was his ability to be natural, and it wasn't something put on. It wasn't something that he was in the role learning how to relate to her. He really felt he was relating to whoever the leading lady was, at the level that the story was demanding, and to be a good partner, you have to be a good listener, and you have to be reacting to the other person. And if you're all wrapped up in your own ego and God, what's my next line, and I think maybe that's what you're referring to, Chris.
Yeah. I think too, so often, a lot of male stars, want to be the A lead. They don't necessarily want to be part of an ensemble, or they certainly don't want, the female actress to upstage them. And, I think Gary Cooper, Cary Grant, I'm trying to think of like a third in there, was just able to be like, we're both stars. We're both equal. It's not about upstaging or kind of taking somebody else's spot. It's about sharing that spot, which Joel McCrea is I think another good example too, which is awesome.
Well, I have, talking about that, the one of the most interesting things, excuse me, about Gary Cooper as an actor is that he had something that you don't find in a lot of male actors. There was a sense, I think, that came perfectly easy, that he had a masculine sensitivity, that he was able to appeal to both men and women, and a lot of male actors don't have that. I'm a big fan of Clark Gable. I think Gable could do some very interesting stuff, but it's very difficult to think of a guy like Clark Gable in terms of sensitivity, and Gary Cooper had that by the ton. The other example for me is, if you've ever seen the film High Noon, there's the point, which is in a way the high point of the movie, where after Sheriff Will Kane realizes that he's not going to get any help in dealing with the outlaws, he goes back to the sheriff's office and he makes out his will, and then he does something very interesting. He puts his arm down on the desk and puts his head on it, and you get the idea that he's almost sobbing in a way. Now, I want to ask you something. Do you think that somebody like John Wayne could have done that scene?
No.
And the answer is hell no. He couldn't have. He
No.
just didn't have, I mean, John Wayne was a kind of guy that, give me a gun, I'm going to go out there and take care of these people, which was a fantasy land. It's a kind of childlike approach to life. I think Gary Cooper as an actor was much more rounded and much deeper. That he was able to see the reality of our emotions, not what some childhood fantasy of them would be, but the reality of them. And I think that's incredibly rare.
Well, Bruce, I think you really hit a nail right on the head, and I think that is one of the reasons that he was drawn to High Noon. That was one of the reasons he became such a close friend of Carl Foreman, because after all, Carl Foreman wrote the scene, and the allegories and the meanings of High Noon are it's been talked about very much, and it seems to be more and more relevant today. And in fact, they're talking about doing a production of High Noon. But because I think Carl Foreman had the realistic take on what was really going on in not only the town of Hadleyville, which was actually taken from a Mark Twain story about a simple little town that looked perfect, a white picket fence and all that, and behind the scenes everybody was corruptible and hypocritical, and they would say to the sheriff, go on, handle it yourself, don't ask me for help. So
but
there was a reality.
You need an actor with the sensitivity to portray that, right?
Yes,
I mean, that's the thing, and I think
vulnerability
there were very
is something
few that could do it.
Yeah. Playing vulnerable, I mean, is tough, I think, for any performer of any era. And he's one of the few that exhibits it, in so much of his work. And it's also fascinating. We asked Wyatt McCrae, Joel McCrae's grandson, about this when we interviewed him a couple months ago about, Hollywood is very invested now in retelling their own stories. And we asked Wyatt about, a Joel McCrae biopic, if that was something he ever wanted to see. Gary Cooper, I mean, had an incredibly fascinating life. I'm curious, Maria, would you want a Hollywood biopic about him made?
It depends on so many things. It depends upon it depends on why are you telling the story. I mean, and as a matter of fact, just a sidebar, Joel McCrae and my father were very, very, very close. They were extremely, in fact, I was born September 15th. September 14th, my mother and father and me inside, and Joel McCrae went to Santa Monica Beach and went swimming. And Joel had one elbow of my mother, keeping her steady, and my father had the other, and they went through the waves and swam, because we all love the ocean. And then we came back home, and she went into labor shortly afterwards. But the McCrae family and the Coopers in those days were extremely close. I know Joel had a fascinating life, and I think I think, I don't know, it depends. For me, it would depend on the approach and why tell the story. I mean, is there, was it Sam Goldwyn who said, if you want to send a message, send a telegram? But he didn't like message films, so to speak. But however, every movie has a story and has a message. I don't know. I'd have to
I know
think of-
Wyatt said that Hollywood would never ask for a Joel McCrea biopic because there's nothing salacious in his life to kind of profit off of. And I was like, fair. That's fair. That's probably a better option. But you're very right that as somebody who we do a show looking at old Hollywood biopics, it really does depend on what they're choosing to focus on and why they're telling it and if they even know the real person, which has happened.
I come from a family of absolutely no note, and even I would be hesitant to let anybody even try to write something about my family. Of just there, it's just too sensitive. It's just
Well, I mean,
you have
everybody.
to know.
Number one, no family's perfect. Everybody is human, and don't tell me that whatever is human can be written about and described and make a hell of a good scene or 3 or 20. I was just speaking the other day with a friend of mine who's very close to Diane Cannon, and I gather the biopic on Cary Grant is just superb, which is
Well, we're hoping to see that soon. So we haven't seen the series yet, but cautiously optimistic. Fingers crossed.
I gather you're in for a treat because everything about Cary Grant, it seems from what I've heard, is handled so well and is with such good taste. I mean, if you're a person, I mean, Bruce, you're I think good taste is probably your middle name, Bruce. And no.
Well, you know what I was thinking of while you were talking is that I remember a couple of years ago there was a biopic about Sinatra, and I thought it was just incredibly bad.
That's most of them. That's most of the movie. Yeah.
It just it was so bad. I'm not even sure why it was bad. I mean, I don't know what the intentions were, but I tell you frankly, if somebody decided to do a biopic of Gary Cooper, for me the approach would be that he was really the most modern of actors of his time, and I think that you could make a very good case that his acting style and his approach and his persona on the screen and all of that foreshadowed the sensitive young men that came along in the 1950s. I mean, I think that they took, Brando and Dean and Montgomery Cliff and all of those. They all took, different approaches to that kind of a persona, but they all had that masculine sensitivity. And to my mind, that goes directly back to Gary Cooper.
Well, Bruce, it's funny you mentioned that. It just reminded me when my father was shooting High Noon. He came home one day and he said, God, he said, there's this young kid, and he said it's like he's following me all around on the set.
Is that right?
And off the set, and he's sort of standing, watching me and observing, and it was Jimmy Dean.
Oh my goodness!
Wow!
You never told me that. That's wonderful. Wow!
I forgot that story.
That's
until
incredible.
You just mentioned it.
No, that just goes to kind of prove my little theory about that.
Very good.
Too. Oh, that's wonderful.
It's a fact. I think it's very good.
Yeah. Oh boy. No, that is really interesting. I find that interesting because I've that kind of approach to acting, what was, and I guess still is called the natural style of acting, which is only natural because there's an awful lot of skill involved in it and talent. But I just think that there's there's this strain of that runs through the history of film, and Gary Cooper is right up at the top of that. And I've never really done the research to try to make a case for it in terms of the anecdotes like you just told me, but I think it's right. I really do think it's there that he was the sensitive masculine man before these guys in the 50s came along.
I think you're right, Bruce. Very interesting.
Very much so. I know that I've been, to throw out another person, I've interviewed John Garfield's daughter, and she's talked very heavily about how, De Niro and all of them were inspired by John Garfield. So, I mean, it's all cyclical. It all builds. And now I'm just going to start trying to find out what modern actor could play Gary Cooper in a biopic. Not that we want one.
Tell me who you come up with.
No one. There is no one. I'm sorry. I will go out on a limb. I don't know of one. I will just say that.
Let me ponder this. I'll come back with some. I'll have to come back with a suggestion, because I mean, you got to find somebody tall, but then you also have to find somebody that also. I have a whole criteria there. I will put this together.
There are too many people who don't belong on
Let me know.
I know you've probably been asked this, a million times, Maria, but I'm going to ask it 1,000,001. Is there a favorite movie of your dad's that you just think like that's if anybody watches just one Gary Cooper movie, this is the one they need to watch?
I can't nail it down to one, honestly. Maybe 5.
We'll take 5.
We'll say 5. We'll take 5. Well, the obvious, High Noon, certainly. I think the Lou Gehrig, Pride of the Yankees.
Yeah,
I love that movie.
And I think Sergeant York. I think his portrayal of Alvin York was, and sounds like I'm just going for other noted figures, but I think he captured and I know he said he was so intimidated at the suggestion of portraying Alvin York, he nearly freaked out. I mean, it was almost beyond his capacity to say yes when I think Jesse Lasky convinced him to do it. But I think a movie, The Hanging Tree, is a film, and Friendly Persuasion, the Quaker story. The Hanging Tree was among the last 4 or 5 films that he made, and I think he played a very, very, very interesting character. He wasn't the obvious hero, and it's sort of a shame that the very last movie he made was not successful. And I think every actor wants to stretch and not get pigeonholed. And in this last movie, called The Naked Edge, it was from a John O'Hara book called The Last Train to Babylon. Anyway, the whole point of the story is that you have to believe until the last 2 minutes of the film that Gary Cooper was a murderer, and the audience wouldn't buy it from the get-go. It was doomed, and it was a good story. I mean, Deborah Carr was a wonderful actress, wonderful director they had, and he loved the story. Didn't know it would be his last film, but that was so I think it was Sam Goldwyn. I read my father said this in an interview where, Goldwyn said, "You can let your audience down once, Coop, but don't try to do it twice." And, you won't, you can never convince anyone that Gary Cooper is going to be a murderer, no matter.
It's the Cary Grant suspicion principle all over again. She's very fascinating.
That's a
Yeah.
wonderful testament to your father's character, though, that if you cannot pull off, if you cannot be believed by an audience to be one thing, the worst of the worst is certainly
Worse, yeah.
to be beloved by your audience so thoroughly is an incredible testament to his talent and his character.
Yeah, and the fact that he would make his audience angry if he tried
Absolutely.
to force himself down their throat as another persona.
Bruce, what about you? I want to extend the question to you. Do you have a Gary Cooper movie that you're like, that's the one?
Yes, I do. I was kind of interested to hear Maria put Hanging Tree in her list, because I think that's a Hanging Tree is a very underrated movie. I think the reason it is because some of the minor characters, I think, are not as good as they should be, and maybe that takes away from the film a little bit. But Gary Cooper's role was just amazing in there. I remember there's one scene where the female lead says to him, asking about his past. And she says something like, "Well, what kind of a person were you?" And he says, "I don't know what kind of a person I was." And there's something about that line and that brief exchange that always strikes me as being so real and so deep. And I can't think how difficult it is to do a simple line like that. But boy, he just knocked it out of the ballpark. My favorite movie would be High Noon. I think for 1,000 reasons. I mean, the directing of it, the way the story is told. It has an early Grace Kelly in it, and she actually does what's expected of her, in the film, and that all worked out well. And I think it's in anybody's list of great Western movies, that would be in there, maybe at the top. It certainly would be for me, and just one of the best movies ever made. Period. It just he did an astounding, low-keyed, job of dealing with some fundamental human questions. And did it with grace and honor and a natural reality that I don't think, I can't think of anybody offhand that would have done it as well. I really can't.
There's a key moment, and it passes so quickly, and I often wonder how many people realize it, or if it hits them, how important it is. The final gunfight scene, and he has the draw on Frank Miller, and he very easily could have pulled the trigger and Miller would have dropped like a stone, but he calls out Miller's name. He doesn't take advantage. There's the moral principle: you don't shoot a man in the back.
Yes.
Calls out Miller's
exactly.
name. Miller turns around. They both fire. But I think that scene tells so much of a moral story, which I think the film does too. But that one scene, for me, encapsulates what we've lost today.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree entirely. And you had mentioned earlier, and I wanted to mention it too, that in a way, High Noon is just as relevant and maybe more relevant today than when it was made.
I think you're right, Bruce.
Very much so. Oh yeah, very, very much so. Which is both interesting and very sad, I think, in many regards, considering our current divisions and all of that. Not to get too in the weeds. But I also think too, I mean, just I have to champion his comedies because again, not everybody could be funny. And I think that he, Emily mentioned Design for Living, which is one of the saucier, pre-codes out there, which I think is great. Ball of Fire is my favorite. It's
Ball
my
of Fire
favorite.
is wonderful. Yes.
Okay.
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
Talk about starring opposite a lady that was not going to give you an inch, Barbara Stanwyck, and Dana Andrews. I just love everybody in that movie. It's great.
Well, and how about Bluebeard's Eighth Wife for comedy?
Yes.
I still need to see that one. I have heard good things.
Oh, it's wonderful. It is.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
And,
for comedy, it's just wonderful.
And bear in mind in the good old days when they're doing a scene together where they're having champagne and caviar in the story. It was real champagne and real caviar. And
Oh my gosh.
apparently it was very, very hot, terribly hot, Santa Ana type hot weather, and retakes. And poor Claudette Colbert got violently ill.
Oh, gosh.
They had to close the set for a day.
Heat and caviar do not mix. That sounds horrible.
Yeah.
Champagne, caviar,
Exactly.
does not mix. But
Oh my gosh.
It's a wonderful film. I urge everyone to come see. And I think one of the things did my father regret not being able to do more comedy. He loved it. I mean, he loved working with Billy Wilder, and he just, I think, I know he would have loved doing more comedy because he had a great sense of timing.
He's a great of it. I was watching, as I mentioned earlier, Design for Living just today, just to watch one of my favorite screwballs again. And there's a scene where they're hiding behind a dressing screen, and he and Frederick March are just doing these wonderful, wonderful physical comedy bits, and it's just so fantastic of comedic timing that very, very few people working today or then truly have. His face is so elastic, but his carriage is so regal that it's just this wonderful juxtaposition while in White Tie and Tails. It's absolutely gorgeous comedy work.
Like you were saying, Bruce, about, the naturalness. I mean, Emily brings up something that I appreciate too about his comedies is Ball of Fire. Dana Andrews is playing a stereotypical gangster out of a noir, and there's a fight sequence between him and Gary Cooper, and Gary Cooper is just acting like every regular person that would be in this situation. He doesn't know how to fight very well. He's they're tripping over each other. I know they said a lot of actors and actresses of this era really didn't like to do pratfalls like that, physical comedy, because they didn't want to look foolish. And that it was, that the directors and producers really did appreciate the A-list actors that were more than willing to take a fall, and get on their face and be the butt of a joke. And I think that Ball of Fire is just, it's a great one. If nobody listening has not seen this, you should just rectify that like right now.
Well, exactly. And to make those kind of, in a way, obviously ludicrous pratfalls and so forth, but to make them seem natural enough and graceful enough to be believable in a sense. I mean, we, ordinarily we would say, oh, well, I mean, if somebody actually did that, they'd break their backs, but to do it in that natural, and I think maybe we could even use the word naive way, that we find perfectly acceptable. I think that takes so much more skill than we realize. I really do. And it may be. Well, I think in Gary Cooper's case, and Maria, you can correct me here if I'm wrong, but I don't think that he ever really got into acting lessons or anything, did he?
No. He never did, and he knew how to fall off a horse.
Yeah, I think it was just
he
pure
never took acting lessons. No.
pure talent and purely intuitive in a way, which is it makes it so much more extraordinary, really.
Yeah, well, that was he felt if he learned a lot about the character prior to beginning to shoot the film, that he wouldn't have to, quote, act. He could understand what it was like to be in that person's skin and then react accordingly.
Exactly. Well, I'm sure we could talk to both of you for another hour, but we don't want to take up your entire evening, which we could do. So we'll wrap it up and leave it there. Gary Cooper, Enduring Style is available wherever you get books. You should buy it. It is a fantastic, lovely addition to anybody's bookcase, and we had such fun getting to read it and experience it. Maria Cooper, Janis, Bruce Boyer, we thank both of you for sitting down and wanting to nerd out with us. We appreciate it so much. Maria, Bruce, feel free to throw out any social media, anything you have coming up that listeners should know about.
Well, thank you so much. It was a treat. Maria and I haven't actually talked for a while, so it was a treat to be with you, Maria, too.
Bruce, the same. I hope maybe we can do some appearances together. I hope maybe the Film Forum will have an opportunity to have a screening of my father's and have the book available. And Bruce, I hope you can come down and we could do a Q&A from the audience, because talking to you, Bruce.
Just try to keep me away.
Well, I hope that I hope the public likes it. It's and it's published by Powerhouse, by the way. They're wonderful house, and I was so really thrilled and happy when they called me and said that they would like to reissue it. And so and it has been somewhat re-edited from the original publication, and it is just it's beautiful. I'm absolutely thrilled by it. I think it's congratulations.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was a good job.
Yeah.
And Maria, you said you have Gary Cooper is represented on social media. Where can listeners find out more?
GaryCooper.com. Google him. That's
exactly. Always Google. Yes. That's going to close out Ticklish Business for today. Of course, you can find Emily and I on all social media platforms. I am at Kristen Lopez 88. Emily is at Ms. Emily Edwards. You can find us there. You can find the podcast wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Reviews matter, so leave us one on Apple Podcasts, 5 stars, please. And we are on social media on Twitter at ticklish_biz, as well as on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at ticklishbiz. If you are listening via Spotify, please remember that if you are a patron, you can listen to all of our bonus content direct from Spotify. You can follow me at therap.com as well, so consider that. Our Patreon helps keep the lights on at Ticklish Biz HQ and gives us chances to do new content like our But Have You Read the series, so consider helping us at patreon.com/ticklishbiz. And remember, every episode of this podcast, going back to episode 1, is available at our archive, which is always free at ticklishbiz.podbean.com. And Emily and I are both authors. You can order our books wherever you get books. We will have a new episode soon. Till then.